The pale stride, the Thule fog. My name is Caleb. I manage the irrigation systems for a 300-acre almond orchard on the western edge of Fresno County. It's a landscape of perfect, mechanical rows, thousands of trees stretching into the San Joaquin Valley. At night, especially during the winter months, the Thule fog rolls in. It's a thick, ground-hugging mist that swallows the world, turning the orchards into a labyrinth of gray pillars and muffled echoes. My job is solitary. I drive a quiet electric ATV through the rows, checking for line breaks and monitoring the pressure valves. You get used to the isolation. You get used to the way the fog plays tricks with your peripheral vision. 2 nights ago, the fog was particularly heavy. It felt wet, clinging to my jacket and smelling of damp earth and nitrogen. I was at the edge of Block 7, near the old drainage canal, when I noticed the first wrong element. The irrigation pressure dropped to 0. It didn't fluctuate, it just stopped. I stepped off my ATV to check the main riser, and the silence hit me. Usually, you can hear the distant hum of the 1 to 5 freeway or the coyotes in the dry wash. But that night, the air was dead. It felt pressurized, as if the fog were made of something heavier than water. I clicked on my high-powered flashlight. The beam struggled against the mist, illuminating only about 10 feet of the orchard floor. Then, I saw the tracks. They weren't footprints. They were 2 parallel ruts in the soft, tilled soil, about 2 feet apart. There were no toe marks, no heels. It looked like someone had dragged 2 heavy rounded pipes through the dirt. The stride was impossible. The gaps between the marks were nearly 5 feet long. "Hello?" I called out. My voice didn't carry. It felt like it was being absorbed by the trees. A movement caught my eye at the edge of the light. Something was crossing the row, about 20 yards ahead. It was pale, bone white. It stood about 4 feet tall, but it didn't have a torso. It didn't have arms. It was just 2 long, slender legs that joined at a small, rounded apex. The skin, if you could call it that, looked like a single piece of seamless, flowing fabric. It moved with a slow, hypnotic grace, its knees bending backward in a way that made my joints ache just watching it. It didn't make a sound. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves. It just drifted through the fog like a detached piece of a dream. I followed it. I know I shouldn't have, but the movement was so fluid, so rhythmic, that I felt a strange pull in my chest, a vibration that matched the creature's stride. I reached the end of the row, where the orchard meets the open scrubland. The creature stopped. It stood perfectly still, its pale form almost invisible against the white wall of the fog. Then, it began to grow. Not by stretching, but by unfolding. A second set of legs, smaller and thinner, emerged from the top of the first pair. It looked like a tripod made of living alabaster. It didn't turn to look at me, but I felt a sudden, sharp drop in the temperature, a localized frost that turned my breath into a cloud of ice. And then I heard the sound. It wasn't a cry or a growl. It was the sound of a zipper being pulled up, very slowly, right behind my ear. I froze. That sound, the slow, metallic slide of a zipper, was so close I could feel the air displacement against my neck. I spun around, sweeping my flashlight in a frantic arc, but there was nothing behind me except the gnarly, moss-covered trunks of the almond trees and the suffocating wall of gray mist. I turned back to the scrubland, but the tripod creature was gone. The ruts in the dirt simply ended, as if the thing had stepped off the surface of the earth. My heart was thumping against my ribs, a frantic, uneven beat. But as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, the rhythm of my heart started to change. It began to slow down. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't calming down. It was being forced into a new, deliberate pace. And then, from deeper within the orchard, I heard the response. Step, step, step. It was a soft, heavy impact against the tilled earth. It was perfectly synchronized with my heartbeat. Every time my heart pulsed, a foot hit the ground somewhere in the fog. I stumbled back toward my ATV, my boots slipping on the irrigation lines. I needed to get to the main pump house. It was a reinforced concrete bunker with a heavy steel door. I fumbled for the ignition on the ATV, but the electric motor just let out a pathetic, dying whine. The battery indicator, which had been full 10 minutes ago, was now flashing red. I looked up. Emerging from the rows on either side of me were more of them. 6, 8, 10. They were different sizes. Some were barely 2 feet tall, skittering like white spiders. Others were nearly 7 feet, their long, ribbon-like legs trailing in the dirt. They moved with that same, sickeningly smooth gait, their bodies swaying like pendulums. They didn't have faces, they didn't have eyes. They were just white, flowing geometry, gliding through the Thule fog. They began to circle me. They didn't close in for an attack. They just paced. Each one moved in a different direction, but their strides were all locked into that same heartbeat rhythm. Step, pulse. Step, pulse. The air around me began to smell like ozone and wet laundry, that sharp, sterile scent of a lightning storm. I felt a tingling sensation in my teeth, a static charge that made my jaw ache. One of the smaller ones drifted closer. It stopped 3 feet away. Up close, its skin didn't look like fabric. It looked like fine white porcelain that was constantly rippling, as if there were a liquid flowing just beneath the surface. It tilted its apex toward me. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt a sensation, a cold hollow ringing in my ears, like a bell being struck miles away. Caleb. The sound didn't come from the creature. It came from the irrigation pipe beneath my feet. The metal was vibrating, turned into a speaker by the static in the air. The rose are uneven. Caleb, we are here. 2, level 4. We are 4, 4, 4, 4. The stride. The creature reached out. It didn't have an arm, but a fold of its white skin detached itself, stretching out like a long, thin ribbon toward my chest. It moved with the speed of a striking snake. The white ribbon of skin touched the center of my chest, right over my sternum. It didn't pierce me. It didn't even hurt. Instead, it felt like a cold, wet wire being soldered to my skin. The moment contact was made, my vision flared not with light, but with a sudden, overwhelming sense of the earth beneath me. I could feel the entire irrigation network. I could feel the water rushing through the PVC pipes, the mineral content of the soil, and the deep, slow vibration of the valley floor. My heartbeat was no longer my own. It was a shared frequency, a heavy thrumming that was being pulled out of my body and pushed into the white creature standing before me. The creature's porcelain skin began to glow with a faint, subcutaneous violet light. It was filling up with my data. The pulse is recorded. Caleb. The pipes hissed beneath my boots. I looked around. The other night crawlers had stopped pacing. They were all standing perfectly still, their apexes pointed directly at me, like a ring of silent white antennae. I realized then that they weren't predators in the biological sense. They were surveyors. They were mapping the resonance of the valley, and I was the fixed point they were using to calibrate the world. But I was fading. Every pulse they took made my limbs feel lighter, more translucent. My hand, holding the useless flashlight, looked pale, not from fear, but because it was losing its opacity. I was becoming part of the fog. I looked at the irrigation riser next to me. It was a heavy iron pipe, bolted into a concrete slab that went 6 feet into the ground. It was the only thing in the orchard that was properly grounded. If I was a circuit, I needed a surge. I reached out and grabbed the iron pipe with my free hand. The cold metal bit into my palm, but I didn't let go. I leaned my weight into it, trying to bridge the gap between the creature's ribbon and the deep earth. The reaction was instantaneous. A bolt of static electricity, blue and jagged, arced from the creature, through my chest, and down my arm into the iron pipe. The sound was like a whip cracking in a tiled room. The smell of scorched ozone filled my lungs. and for a second, the Thule fog turned a brilliant electric gold. The ribbon snapped back, recoiling like a burnt nerve. The creature let out a sound, not a scream, but the sound of 1,000 glass marbles shattering on a concrete floor. It stumbled, its long, graceful legs buckling into a chaotic, tangled mess. The pressure in my ears vanished. The heartbeat in the ground stopped. I collapsed against the riser, gasping for air that finally felt like oxygen again. I looked up, expecting to see them fleeing. But they weren't running. They were dissolving. The night crawlers were losing their shape, their white forms turning into thin, wispy streamers of mist that were indistinguishable from the Thule fog. Within seconds, the orchard was empty. I stayed there for an hour, my hand still fused to the cold iron pipe, watching the fog swirl around the almond trees. The irrigation pressure suddenly surged back to life, the water hissing through the lines with a comforting, mechanical roar. But as I stood up to walk back to the ATV, I looked down at my chest. There, right where the ribbon had touched me, was a mark. It wasn't a burn. It was a perfect, white circle of skin that didn't have any hair, any pores, or any warmth. And when I moved, I noticed something else. My reflection in the ATV's side mirror didn't match my movements. There was a delay, a split-second lag, as if my body were still trying to catch up to a rhythm that didn't belong to this world. I drove. I didn't care that the electric ATV was still sputtering, or that the battery was screaming in its final stage of depletion. I just needed to be away from the orchard, away from the rows that felt like the teeth of a giant trap. As I hit the gravel road leading to the main highway, the Thule fog started to thin. The moonlight finally broke through, illuminating the vast, flat expanse of Fresno County. But the world didn't look right. The colors were desaturated, a pale, milky version of reality. I reached the asphalt of Highway 145 and pulled over under a buzzing street lamp. I needed to see my face. I needed to know I was still here. I leaned toward the rearview mirror. My reflection was there, but the lag was worse. I raised my hand to my face, and the image in the mirror waited a full second before mimicking the gesture. It was like watching a live broadcast with a bad satellite connection. My reflection's eyes were flat, a dull, waxy white that lacked the flicker of life. Then, the mirror Caleb didn't stop moving when I did. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, its jaw unhinging in that slow, mechanical way I'd seen in the orchard. It didn't speak. It just moved its lips to the rhythm of a silent zipper. Zzz. I scrambled out of the ATV, falling onto the cold asphalt. I looked back at the orchard I had just left. In the distance, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, I saw them. They weren't in the trees anymore. They were standing on the highway, hundreds of them. A long, bone-white line of night crawlers, their spindly legs stretching across the lanes. They weren't moving toward me. They were just pacing the white lines of the road. Step, step, step. The sound came from the asphalt beneath me. The road was vibrating, carrying the rhythm of their stride for miles. I looked at the power lines overhead. They were sagging, the heavy copper wires bowing down toward the creatures as they passed beneath. I realized then that the mapping wasn't over. I wasn't the fixed point they were using to calibrate the orchard. I was the carrier. I was the bridge they used to cross over from the fog into the grid. A car appeared on the horizon, its headlights cutting through the haze. It was a semi-truck, hauling a load of produce. I tried to wave it down, to scream a warning, but my voice came out as that same hollow bell ring. The truck didn't slow down. It drove right through the line of white entities. The driver didn't see them. The truck passed through their pale forms as if they were nothing more than pockets of mist. But as the trailer cleared the line, the truck's taillights flickered. The red glow turned a sickly electric violet, and for a split second, I saw the driver's silhouette in the cab. He didn't have a torso. He didn't have arms. He was just two long, pale legs fused to the steering wheel. I stayed on the shoulder of the highway until the sun came up. The night crawlers vanished with the first light of dawn, dissolving back into the dry valley air. My reflection eventually caught up with me. the lag disappearing as the static in my teeth faded. But the white circle on my chest is still there. It's cold to the touch, and every time I walk, I find myself counting my steps, trying to make sure I'm not moving too smoothly, trying to make sure my knees are bending the right way. If you're driving through the Central Valley and the Thule fog gets so thick you can't see the hood of your car, don't look for the road lines. And if you hear a sound like a zipper pulling up in the back seat, don't check the mirror. Because once they have your rhythm, you don't need legs to keep walking. You just need to be part of the pulse.